Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The lock didn't just click. It screamed as the deadbolt was sheared off by sheer, unadulterated kinetic force, sending the heavy oak door crashing into the dim apartment like a coffin lid sealing a tomb. Julian didn't flinch. He sat in the wingback chair facing the shattered entrance, his hands resting protectively over the swell of his abdomen, hidden beneath layers of heavy wool. Outside, the neon rain of Sector 4 lashed against the window pane, a rhythmic drumming that had been his only companion for 6 months. He had calculated this moment down to the second. He knew the blast radius of Cashin's temper. He knew the exact time it would take for the Grand Duke to tear through the city's security grid. Julian was a strategist, formerly the most brilliant mind in the Viridian military, but even the greatest tactician cannot outmaneuver a force of nature. And Cashin Drave, the Wolf of the North, was a hurricane in a black trench coat. Cashin stepped through the splintered frame, the air in the room instantly becoming heavy, charged with the static electricity of a furious alpha. He was soaking wet, his silver hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping onto the shoulders of his military-grade coat. But it was his eyes, burning with the crimson glow of active feral instinct, that sucked the oxygen out of the room. "You're hard to find," Cashin said, his voice a low, vibrating growl that rattled the teacups on the table. "I didn't want to be found," Julian replied, his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He kept the blanket pulled high. "You shouldn't be here, Cashin. This sector is neutral ground." "Neutral?" Cashin laughed, a dark, jagged sound devoid of humor. He kicked the shattered remains of the door aside and stalked into the room. "You vanished 3 years ago. You left a resignation letter and a ring on my nightstand. You disappeared into the ether, Julian. I tore the world apart looking for you. I burned cities. And I find you in a slum, smelling like—" Cashin stopped. He froze mid-step, about 5 feet away. His nostrils flared. The scent in the room was unmistakable. It wasn't the scent of Julian the Beta, the crisp, dry smell of old paper and ink that Cashin had loved for a decade. It was something sweeter, something cloying and distressed. It was the scent of milk, honey, and terrified Omega. Cashin's gaze dropped. It swept over Julian's pale, gaunt face, the dark circles under his eyes, and landed on the mound beneath the blanket. In a blur of motion too fast for human eyes, Cashin crossed the distance. He didn't attack. He fell to his knees, gripping the armrests of Julian's chair, trapping him. He ripped the blanket away. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder outside. Julian was undeniably, heavily pregnant. His abdomen was round and high, straining against his oversized sweater. For a man born a beta, this was biologically impossible. It was a violation of natural law. Cashin stared at the belly, his crimson eyes trembling. The shock momentarily eclipsed the rage, but then the fury returned, hotter and more volatile than before. He looked up, his face twisted in a mask of betrayal and horror. "Who did this to you?" Cashin roared, the sound shaking the floorboards. "Who turned you into an Omega? Whose child is it?" Julian flinched, instinctively curling around his stomach. "Cashin, listen to me. No." Cashin stood up, pacing the small room like a caged animal. He grabbed a vase from the mantel and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into dust. Betas don't present late. Not without illegal genetic modification. Not without torture. Did they capture you? Did the Southern Federation experiment on you? Tell me who did it, and I will slaughter their entire bloodline. "I did it to myself," Julian shouted back, the exertion making him dizzy. Cashin stopped, his back to Julian. The air crackled. Slowly, he turned around. "What?" "I did it to myself," Julian whispered, the fight draining out of him. He looked down at his hands. 3 years ago. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I didn't leave because of the politics." "Then why?" Cashin demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Why did you break me, Julian?" "Because I was dying." The revelation hung in the damp air. Cashin's feral aura flickered. "It was the Chimera virus," Julian continued, his voice trembling. "It eats the neural pathways of betas. I had 6 months, Cashin. Maybe less. There was no cure. The doctors said I would lose my mind, then my motor functions, then my life. I couldn't let you watch that. You are a burner alpha. If you watched me wither away, your grief would have triggered a thermal event. You would have burned the capital to ash. I left to save the city. I left to save you from becoming a monster. Cashin walked back to the chair, his movements slow, unsteady. He looked at Julian as if seeing him for the first time. You idiot. You brilliant, arrogant idiot. I found a doctor in the Outer Rim, Julian explained quickly, needing to get the truth out before his courage failed. He had a theory. The virus targets beta-specific distinct markers. If I changed my biology, if I forced a secondary presentation, the virus would have nothing to eat. It was an experimental retroviral therapy. It was torture, Cashin. For a year, my bones broke and reformed. My blood boiled. But I survived. I presented as an Omega. Cashin reached out, his hand hovering over Julian's face, trembling. You went through that alone? In a slum? I had to. And this? Cashin's eyes drifted to the pregnancy. The jealousy returned, sharper this time. You survived. You became an Omega. And you found someone else? You replaced me. Julian let out a bitter, wet laugh. Replaced you? Cashin, look at me. Look at the timeline. I've been in hiding for 3 years. I've been an Omega for 2. I haven't been with anyone. Don't lie to me. Cashin snapped, pointing at the belly. The evidence is staring me in the face. You're 8 months along. Who is the father? You are. The words were soft, barely a breath, but they hit Cashin with the force of a freight train. He staggered back, his legs hitting the coffee table. That's impossible. We haven't. I haven't seen you in 3 years. The Masquerade of St. Jude, Julian said, tears finally spilling over his lashes. 4 months ago, the diplomatic summit in the neutral zone. Cashin's eyes widened. The Omega in the silver mask. I was in heat, Julian confessed, shame coloring his pale cheeks. The suppressants failed. I should have run. But I saw you. You looked so lonely. You were drinking that terrible whiskey you hate. I thought. Just one night. I was wearing a scent blocker and a mask. I thought I could steal one night with you before I disappeared forever. I didn't know. I didn't think this could happen. Cashin fell to his knees again. The red in his eyes faded, replaced by a stunned, trembling slate gray. He reached out, his large, calloused hand touching the curve of Julian's stomach. Mine, he choked out. Yours, Julian confirmed. A son. I checked. Cashin rested his forehead against Julian's knees, his shoulders shaking. The most powerful man in the northern sector, the man who had crushed rebellions and toppled kings, was weeping. I was going to kill him, Cashin whispered into the fabric of Julian's trousers. When I saw you, I thought some enemy had defiled you. I wanted to tear the world down. I know, Julian soothed, threading his fingers through Cashin's damp hair. That's why I ran again. I was afraid you'd reject him. Or worse, that you'd think I did this to trap you. Trap me? Cashin looked up, his eyes raw. Julian, I have been trapped by you since the day we met. You are my cage and my key. Suddenly, the shattered door frame splintered further. Julian gasped as a red laser appeared on Cashin's chest. Down! Julian screamed, shoving Cashin. The window exploded inward. Gunfire raked the room, shredding the upholstery of the wingback chair where Julian had been sitting seconds before. Cashin moved with supernatural speed, grabbing Julian and rolling them behind the heavy oak overturn of the sofa. They followed me, Cashin snarled, his eyes flashing crimson again. The Southern Separatists. They've been tracking my energy signature. They want the cure, Julian hissed, wincing as a cramp seized his lower back. They know I'm the only successful subject of the retrovirus. If they get me, they can militarize the gender swap technology. They aren't getting you, Cashin growled. He peered over the sofa. 3 figures in tactical gear were rappelling through the window, weapons raised. Cashin, Julian gripped his ex's arm. There's a kinetic dampener under the floorboards. It's why I chose this apartment. If you use your full power, you'll bring the building down on top of us. I don't need my power to kill trash, Cashin spat. He looked at Julian, his gaze intense. Stay down. Cover your ears. Cashin vaulted over the sofa. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Cashin moved like a shadow, a blur of violence. He didn't use his thermal abilities. He used his bare hands. The first intruder's neck snapped before he could raise his rifle. The second man fired, But Cashin sidestepped the bullets, grabbing the gun barrel and driving the stock into the man's throat. The third intruder, the leader, panicked. He pulled a grenade from his belt. "Drave," the mercenary screamed. "Back off or we all die." Cashin froze. He could survive the blast. Julian, in his condition, could not. "Drop it," Cashin commanded, his voice vibrating with alpha dominance. "I'll blow us to hell," the man yelled, his finger trembling on the pin. From behind the sofa, Julian's voice cut through the noise. "He's bluffing, Cashin. Look at his stance. He's shifting his weight to his back foot. He plans to throw it and jump out the window." The mercenary's eyes flicked to Julian for a fraction of a second, a fatal mistake. "Bad tactic," Julian whispered. Cashin lunged. He caught the grenade hand, crushing the bones until the man shrieked and dropped the explosive. Cashin caught it midair, shoved the mercenary through the broken window, and hurled the grenade after him. Boom! The explosion outside rattled the building, flashing orange light against the rain-slicked walls. Cashin stood panting amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving. He turned slowly to Julian. "You still analyze everything." "Old habits." Julian managed a weak smile, but then his face crumpled. He clutched his stomach, letting out a sharp cry of pain. "Julian." Cashin was there in an instant, scooping him up into his arms. "The stress." Julian gasped, sweat beading on his forehead. It's too early." "Cashin, it hurts." "I've got you," Cashin said, his voice fierce and steady. He kicked the remnants of the wall aside to clear a path. "My extraction team is 2 minutes out. You are not dying. You are not losing this baby. Do you hear me?" "Cashin." Julian grabbed the lapel of Cashin's coat. "If you have to choose. If something goes wrong." "Shut up," Cashin snarled, but he pulled Julian closer against his chest. "There is no choice. I am keeping both of you. You don't get to be noble and sacrifice yourself again. You belong to me." Julian rested his head against Cashin's shoulder, the scent of sandalwood and rain overwhelming his senses. For the first time in 3 years, the cold dread in his chest began to thaw. He was tired of running. He was tired of being the strategist. "Okay," Julian whispered, closing his eyes. "I surrender." 2 years later, the nursery in the northern ducal palace was bathed in soft, golden morning light. It was a far cry from the rainy slum in Sector 4. The walls were painted a soft cream, and the crib was carved from ancient ironwood, worth more than most cities. Julian stood by the window, watching the snow fall over the capital. He looked healthy now. The gauntness was gone, replaced by a healthy flush. The retrovirus had changed him. Yes, his features were softer, his scent sweeter, but his eyes were still sharp, still calculating. He was currently reviewing a datapad containing the troop movements for the upcoming border patrol. "You're working," a voice rumbled from the doorway. Julian didn't turn. "Someone has to ensure your left flank isn't exposed during the winter solstice, Your Grace." Cashin walked in, shirtless, a towel slung low around his hips. He looked at peace, the feral edge in his eyes replaced by a calm, simmering warmth. He wrapped his arms around Julian's waist from behind, resting his chin on Julian's shoulder. "Put it away," Cashin murmured, nipping lightly at the sensitive gland on Julian's neck. "It's important," Julian protested weakly, leaning back into the embrace. "Not as important as this," Cashin said. He turned Julian around and kissed him, slow, deep, and possessive. It was a kiss that claimed, a kiss that reminded Julian exactly who he belonged to. A soft coo from the crib broke them apart. Cashin smiled, walking over to the crib. He reached down and lifted a toddler with messy silver hair and bright, intelligent jade eyes. "He looks like you," Julian said softly, leaning against the wall. "He has your brain," Cashin grunted, bouncing the boy. "He figured out how to unlock the playpen yesterday. He's going to be a nightmare." "He's going to be a genius," Julian corrected. Cashin walked back to Julian, holding their son in one arm and pulling Julian close with the other. "He's a Drave. He'll be trouble." Cashin grew serious then. He traced the faint, silvery scar on Julian's neck where the mating mark sat, a permanent claim. "You never told me," Cashin said quietly. "About the pain. The transformation." "It doesn't matter," Julian replied, touching Cashin's cheek. "It brought me here. I would have torn the world apart to save you," Cashin said intense. "You didn't have to do it alone." "I know," Julian whispered. I know that now. Cassian kissed his forehead. Never again, Julian. No more secrets. No more running. You are my strategist, my Omega, my heart. If you try to leave again, I will lock you in this tower. Julian smiled, a genuine, happy smile. I think the lock on the tower door is broken anyway. I'll buy a new one, Cassian smirked. Now, come back to bed. The strategist needs to rest. And the Duke, Cassian growled playfully, needs to remind his Omega exactly why he shouldn't work on weekends. And that is how the wolf finally caught the one thing he couldn't hunt, forgiveness. If you enjoyed seeing Julian surrender to his fate, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a partner who hid a child from you for your own good? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,